welcome to everyone. Kia ora, our friends and colleagues from New Zealand. We've got international guests here. Welcome to the course today. It's going to be another really fantastic course. Please bring up your attention, your efforts, your contribution, your humor, your lovely presence to this course. Prue has fantastic material for you, so be ready for that. But first, let me introduce my wonderful friend Prue here. Prue is I call Prue a practitioner par excellence, a practitioner who does fantastic practice. Let me start with giving you a few highlights before go to the formality of what she has delivered. So Prue has authored the Race Pedestrian Priority Crossing Technical Guidelines in Queensland and has helped observing the widespread take-up of these treatments across the network. This is not easy, fantastic job. She has contributed to the publication of new technical guidance for race crossings at roundabouts. So Prue, like you said, is not stoppable. We don't stop with using this solution just for one location, all over the network. Prue is amazing in terms of capturing parental concerns about walking and cycling, include communities and their opinions in the design. So she's really good at that as well. Also, she has very successfully advocated for inclusion and incorporation of safe system in all what we're doing. Now, she has done quite a few other things that I want to talk about, and they're really relevant to this course. She has provided technical guidance to active transport projects across Queensland. So when she's talking about matters today, they're coming from actually practicing them. So ask those difficult questions of Prue. How can I do that? How did you overcome such blockade or such resistance? So Prue can give you really good advice. She has worked with local government. She has done training and educating practitioners. So she's really good at that. Now, formally, Prue has been in the business for 20 years. She's a CP Eng. She's a very good active transport infrastructure expert. She directs at the moment the sideline traffics and advises to the Queensland Transport and Main Roads. Also chairs Engineers Australia's Women in Transport group. So I love Prue and she's amazing. You've got to notice that. So with that, I bring you Prue Oswin from Queensland. Prue, floor is yours.
That was quite the introduction, Hafez. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. We have a pretty packed agenda today, so we're going to get stuck into it. We've gone into the why race crossings, and this session is really about drilling down a bit deeper and getting into where are we going to put them. So we're getting a bit closer to the detail, but still kind of thinking at that kind of planning level, thinking about how we can get through the next stages. So when we're talking about where, it's good to have a map. So we're starting with a map for today's presentation. So first of all, I'm just going to start with a bit of reflection on what race crossings are and why, make sure we get our definitions right. Look at where we are now, and that's where we'll be reflecting on some of the homework that we did and some of the data that we provided in our survey and our own perceptions of where we should be installing crossings or where crossings are needed on the network. We're then going to break it down into greenfield and brownfield sites and look at where crossings are needed in both of these situations. We'll look about the rules about where. So we know we've got technical guidelines and governance around where we can put crossings in. So we'll talk through some of those, and that ties to feasibility. And then we'll go into our case study in blah, blah. Now, I think most of you have done the survey now, so that was great. We've got some of the results I've brought them into our presentation so we can have a look at that. If you haven't done the survey, make sure you get into that at some point before the course ends so that we have everybody completed that homework task, but it won't be a problem for today. So starting with a reflection in terms of what is a raised crossing. There's three. We've kind of drilled it down to three key attributes of what makes a raised crossing. So the first one is that it's a crossing for path users. So it's a crossing point. It needs to have paths connecting to it. The second attribute is it needs to have some kind of speed control. We'll talk about a lot about this further, but that's our safety system that opens up the opportunities for people to see each other, reduce the vehicle speeds and provide that safety benefit. And the other one that it needs to have path priority. So path users have priority over vehicles. We also have to think about what is not a raised crossing. So I've just got some examples here of things that are not what we'd consider raised crossings. So they're raised. So if we look at this example on the left here, it's raised, but it doesn't have priority to path users. And what we often notice is there's these little signs that pop up around these types of facilities where there's been some kind of ambiguity. So we're trying to reinforce that path users have to give way here. So we put up a little sign. And just as an experiment, I asked my 8-year-old son when we were at this site on the left here, who goes first here? Do we go first when we're walking, or do the cars go first? And I think he looked around at the signs and the line marking, he didn't read this and said, we go first. So it's that kind of ambiguity. And in the next section on who we'll be looking at, you'll be learning a lot about stay safe, obvious, and step free. And it kind of fails that obvious test when we have to be questioning who goes first. So that's what is in a raised crossing. So we'll have a few little action times in this presentation, and this is just to kind of get us going and moving. And so we're just going to apply some of that in practice. This is our wombat's thumbs up, thumbs down. So we've got this very judgmental wombat here who will be judging us on these. So what I want to do is just use the chat quickly. And for each of these examples, you're going to let me know whether it's a raised crossing or whether it isn't a raised crossing. So this is our first example. This is in Maroochydore. Where's my chat?
So I think it's quite quickly consensuous. No, it's not.
It's not a raised crossing. Yeah. No, judgmental wombat. Here he is. And have a look at this little sign in the background. Pedestrians give way to traffic. So as predicted, these kind of things seem to pop up, and they might pop up in all sorts of different situations. Here's another one. What do we think about this one? See the chat here.
It's majority yes. We had one no.
Well, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that. But yep, our judgmental wombat, he's thumbs up to this one. A standard application, really. There we go. And it's that one's installed near a roundabout. What about this one?
I think our group is quite unanimous.
No, this is a very interesting one, actually. This is actually the driveway access to a school. So there's some treatments that would suggest that path users have priority, but there's nothing to drivers to suggest that path users have priority. Legally, the path users would have priority in this situation because it's technically a driveway, but there's nothing there to indicate that to drivers. So it's an ambiguous situation. Judgmental wombat. This one.
Let's see. Oh, this is more divisive.
Yeah.
We're giving 40, 60, 50, 50, yes, no.
Yeah, this one is more divisive. And I guess in terms of that, it's not as obvious as the other ones. So what we could do, I think we need to think about how we could make it more obvious. This is a shared path priority crossing in Queensland. It's not great from the view we've taken it, but what you can see in the background here is there is a give way line and there's give way signs on the approaches. Right in the background here, you can see that there's a little underplate for the give way signs that has 2 path users or 2, and it's got the ped and cycle symbol. Some other things we could potentially do to this example to make it more obvious, because it's a shared path, is we could put a center dashed line down the middle just to show that we've got path users coming in 2 directions. It's kind of mimicking the bikeway standards for crossings, and that might make it help to that obviousness about it. But that one is one we would call a raised crossing. And our final one. What are we thinking here?
So this one is like heavier towards no, maybe 70 to 30 or 80 to 20.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's probably a good call. It's not in this situation, but you can see this little raised this road hump in the background. So we do talk later about how we can provide speed control without actually raising the crossing in some situations. And a typical way of doing that is to provide humps either side of the crossing. And in that situation, it would create that low speed environment we're looking for. in this environment, they don't have a hump on the approach to the crossing, so we wouldn't call that, but it could easily be retrofitted to provide that same level of safety that we're looking for. Judgmental wombat. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at where are we now? What sites did we identify in our local walk? So most of you have gone out and done a walk and had a look at the conflict zones. As you've been walking around, you've looked at where there's conflict between people walking and vehicles. And so what we've done is we've got some of the data from that. So what I've done is I've picked just a few different examples from people's walks that we can have a little bit more of a look at. Now, the best way to do this, I think, is have a look at the video, but it's not always great with me talking at the same speed of the video. So we'll just see how we go. But this is Nelson. So what you can see is there's a couple of different sites. So they're from different course participants. The green symbols that you see are places where people suggested raised crossings, and the red symbols are where there's conflict. So what we see here is we're seeing conflict on mid-block here, and also at the driveways. So the driveways is certainly a good example of where you can use a raised crossing, potentially at mid-block as well. It's a really strong treatment, as we've heard, so it's worth considering it. Okay, my video is just going on and on now, so I'll catch up to it. But we had a side road there as well. I found these roundabouts really interesting. So now we're coming more into a business precinct or a CBD kind of area. Imagine there's lots of different movements in terms of people going from across the street into different attractors. So roundabouts, we can have real problems in terms of providing a predictable environment for people to cross. And they're also really good environments where we can install raised crossings, because we've already got the speeds relatively low, and the raised crossing can give the priority to path users, which connects that up and can be a great kind of complementary treatment that makes the whole system work really well. So I like this example. If anyone wants to provide any more information about it, let me see. So my video is just running again, don't know why. So just as I said before, we had mid-block, side road, roundabout, and we had some in the neighbourhood and some in the kind of commercial centre. I thought this was a really interesting example as well. There's just one site here, and this is in Brisbane, in Jindalee in Brisbane. But what you'll see here is it's a really interesting side road crossing, and it looks like with the turn radius there that we're probably going to have high vehicle speeds. It's going to be really difficult for people to predict which vehicles are actually continuing straight on the major through road and which ones are turning there. So I thought that was a really interesting example in terms of, and I'm not sure what's being suggested here, if we're thinking about just treating the slip lanes or treating the slip lanes and the entire crossing, but certainly looking at what we can do on the entire crossing would be a very interesting kind of study. So just one more example, and this is another one, I believe, nope, I'm going back there again. This one is also from Nelson, and I thought this was really interesting too. Some of the sites that this person's identified are kind of places where it's very unpredictable environments. It's kind of like here we have a four-way uncontrolled intersection. If you imagine trying to cross at that site, you'd be wondering, you know, having to check vehicles from 4 different directions. You look at this and it's kind of an unusual crossing, and often with a crossing we can provide that predictability of this is where people are going to cross the road, they have priority, this is when we need to slow down. So and we can see this little, I think that's a pedestrian bridge, and also this unusual environment over to the east there. And so I thought they were some really good examples, but I just wanted to show you that so you could get an idea of what it's like to actually put that data into the survey as a survey participant, but also what you get at the other end and what it looks like. So we also, when we did our survey, we asked you to think about asked you to identify what you thought about when you were identifying those crossing sites. And that's why we're kind of thinking about this unconscious bias and thinking about, oh, we're just thinking about our own experiences, or are we thinking about the broader community? So we did a very good job of thinking about crossing our own experiences, as we'd expect. We did a really good job of thinking about road safety. Most people were thinking about places that other people had noticed. They'd noticed other people having difficulties crossing the road. A few less were thinking about children or older people or people with mobility and cognitive impairments. It was, I was pleased to see the types of places that raised crossings are typically installed on. We weren't all relating to that. So it suggests to me that we might have some willingness to kind of push the boundaries in terms of, oh, we haven't been using these enough in the network, and we're more looking at where would they work well rather than where have they traditionally been used. So that was good. And most people didn't try and avoid putting them on busy roads. And it's interesting that they're a very strong treatment. They're a very cost-effective treatment. So at least leaving them on the list is something to be considered. On busier roads where we definitely need to provide facilities is a great idea. It's one of your options. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, I've put that data and a couple of case studies onto the Miro board as well. So just to summarize kind of with that exercise, what we're trying to do is give that survey participant experience, capture some of the pre-existing ideas we have so we can critically reflect on that, the types of places that people walk and might be looking at crossings. And so you can get an idea of what other people in the course are thinking about. So hopefully that's useful. We will also go back to our BliveLike case study towards the end of this session as well, and we'll have a look at an actual case study there. Also, it gives you an idea of how kind of quick and easy it is to get this data. These are not complicated surveys. This is a process that can be easily scaled up and scaled down to do it at a local neighbourhood level or to do it at a city or a state or a regional kind of level. Yes, Faiz, we've got a question.
Yes, I have a question. So you mentioned a very important point, and I don't remember if you're going to talk about it through the course today, or maybe it's a good time to pause and answer that question. Bias. We all have biases. Yes. How do you yourself overcome your own biases, and how people can learn from that?
Oh, I like this. I think unconscious bias takes a lot of work. It's not a one-off piece of, okay, I've been trained in unconscious bias, I'm good now. As an example, I did go to an unconscious bias session about a month ago run by the Institute of Engineers, and they had 5 principles. Proximity bias, I can remember that one. Status bias. Anyway, there's a checklist. So my short answer is that it takes ongoing work, and I think we need to constantly be rechecking our unconscious bias and understanding that it's there, especially in an industry where it's dominated by a particular demographic and things. It's really important to be testing yourself outside, talking to other people. Like there's the quick and easy ways, and then there's the more complicated ways, but making sure you've got diverse groups you're working with, and if you haven't, that you're reaching out into your networks as a start. But I guess the first thing that helps with unconscious bias is being conscious of it, because that kills it.
Thank you.
Now, so, okay, where are raised crossings needed? So in this next section, we're going to be talking about greenfield sites. And the framework we're really going to be looking at is where is there risk and where is there connection needed? So we've got these 2 kind of pieces of the puzzle that we want to be putting them in, where there's enough risk to justify a treatment that needs to be treated, but also in places where people need connection. Now, sounds pretty simple, but when we're talking about risk, we all have a different interpretation of what risk is, and we need to look at that as professionals, but we also have our personal experiences of that. I defer back to the Safe System Principles, and that's how we approach road safety in Australia and New Zealand. We have this overarching vision of no one being killed or seriously injured as a result of road crashes. I like to say it aligns really well with my vision when I go out for a walk with my family or take my kids to school, that none of us should be killed or seriously injured. That's what we're hoping for. So we talked about that in session 1. We talked about that in the why. We talked about the Safe System Principles. We also talked about that ripple effect. And so how this piece of this risk or this trauma, or if one of those incidents does happen, it has this ongoing ripple that goes through one person's life and multiple other people's lives and things. So it just kind of embeds what our vision is there. And we can design project by project to address these issues. And the second side is connection. And that's about things like origin and destination, movement in place, and desire lines. So I'm going to talk about each of those separately. So the first one is risk. Now we need a nice figure to keep this trapped in your brain. I'm from Queensland, so we're going for a crocodile, but I thought it might be appropriate. New Zealand doesn't seem to have a lot of risky as many risky things. If anyone's got any ideas, that's all I could come up with. I thought that might be more appropriate for Melbourne. Something in your mind that this is what we need to address this risk and make it not risky. That's what we're trying to do. So, and this is kind of the one of the important sections of this presentation. We're going to go through what are called the sustainable safety principles. These principles are documented in Promoting Safe System in the Planning Process, which is an Austroads guideline in 2015. They come from kind of Sweden and the Vision Zero, how they break down their sustainable safety plan. So I find these are really, I've been using them for probably 5 or 6 years now. When we develop new guidance around providing for vulnerable road users, I defer back to these principles to make sure that we're providing an approach that embeds these principles. They kind of give me the rigor around understanding what the risk is. So they're all big, long words, but we will go through these one by one to talk about our kind of checklist. The other thing I've done is I've put a cheat sheet in the resources of the learning management system. So it's got these principles there, and there's kind of a checklist for how you can apply them. But we'll take a little bit of time on this now. So the first principle is functionality, and this is about acknowledging that we have all of our streets and roads defined in a functional hierarchy. So at the highest level, we have our arterial roads, which really have a through function. So that's about getting people around quickly, efficiently, from place to place. At the lowest level, we have our local streets, and they have an access or an exchange function. So through is basically, getting from A to B, going in one direction, and access is more about exchange. So cross movements, think of intersections, think of driveways, think of accessing places. And then at collector streets, so the ones in between, we're often looking at something like a through function mid-block and then an access function at intersections. So with the functionality, if we try to do too much with one road, then things get risky. If we're trying to get people from A to B really fast, and we're trying to get people in another direction really fast, or we've got people crossing the road, it gets risky. And that's why we need to define our roads in this functional hierarchy. I really like this quote, and this is from the third edition of the Sustainable Safety Principles. So it's not referenced in the current Australian guidelines, but it's where it's coming from. So it's interesting to refer to. But where we can't achieve this monofunctionality, so a single function, we aim to provide adequate safety with safe speeds. So if you think of some of the common examples that I experience, is we've got a road that might be a subarterial road. So it's defined as having a through function, but it was actually just designed as a collector road or a lower order road. It's still got driveways, it's got parked cars, it's got people crossing the road. So it's trying to do too many things. And in those situations, we need to look at reviewing speeds to provide for the most vulnerable road users. And I think that's a really nice quote about that. If anybody's got any questions, this stuff's a bit dense, so more than happy to take questions.
So I just mentioned a comment here. So I put it in the chat room team. These are all material that Prue and other presenters have done effort to prepare. But when you ask questions, you actually open door in our brains to come up with better information. So don't be shy, ask questions.
So I thought this was a good example of something that's trying to do, too many things. It looks to me like we've got an intersection, but we're trying to provide for a through function. We've got these really large radius slip lanes here that allow people to whiz around the corner as if it's the most important thing in the world to get from A to B really quickly. But we've got a shopping centre and houses and driveways and things. So that's the example of where we need to look at this part of the network and go, hey, at this part of the network, it's really about exchange. So we need to make this safe for that exchange function, for managing all the users in that area, crossing in different directions and interacting. So that was a nice example there from our thing. The next principle is homogeneity. And so homogeneity is really about having equality in speed and direction between users. So at higher speeds, we want to have kind of similar mass and similar direction. We want to be separating the fast from the slow. We don't want to be mixing them all all together. So I've got this example because it's actually taken on a pedestrian crossing, and you can see we've got vastly different speeds in terms of our users, as well as having different speeds. So this is an example of something that doesn't meet that homogeneity. If we were going to put bikes on this road as well, that wouldn't meet that criteria as well. So basically, we've got big, fast stuff over here, and we've got small, slow stuff over here. We also use that principle when we're thinking about separating people riding from people walking, because crashes between those users can also result in serious injuries or fatal injuries as well. This is a contrasting example where what we're doing is at that crossing point, at the place where the vulnerable road users are coming in contact with the big fast stuff, is we're slowing the big fast stuff down to create those homogeneous speeds. Predictability. We'll spend a little bit of time on this. This is a video. Now, if you just, if you just look up the hill, you'll see these kids coming down. So the thing these kids have going for them is if they get themselves across this side road, then basically they can get the rest of the way to school without having to pedal again, because they've got all that momentum coming down the hill, which if they can hang on to, they can get across there. So there's a big incentive for them to keep up their speed. It's going to be very difficult for them to predict which of those cars, if any of those cars are going to be turning. So basically the assumption here, there hasn't been any slowing down, is that all the cars are going fast. Predictability is about being able to predict your own path of travel and the path of travel of other users. And when things become unpredictable, then it becomes very difficult to predict when crashes might occur. The examples we have at roundabouts is a really good example of predictability, because the same issue happens where it can become incredibly difficult for people to predict whether which vehicles are actually turning off the roundabout. And at that side road that we were looking at before, it's difficult to see which vehicles are coming through and which ones are leaving. As a counter to predictability, this is a site just down the road from that original site. And this is how we've made it more predictable. So what we've done here is we've installed a raised crossing. We've made it predictable what the pedestrian's path of travel is going to be. This is where they're going to cross. Then there's signs, there's line marking to delineate, to identify that path users have priority, as well as that we've raised the crossing to create lower speeds, which opens up time for everybody to react and to see each other. So in both examples, the path users actually legally have right of way over the vehicles turning into that side road. But in the previous example, there wasn't anything in the design to suggest that they actually had right of way. So this is what we're trying to do with predictability. One of the things with the yellow crossings too, these are being installed around schools. So the example below, there's some little extracts from a video that was developed as part of the project to roll out and to distribute between the parents and citizens clubs to the students and parents and things. But one of the reasons we made it yellow on top, we wanted to make it predictable. It's similar enough to a path that it looks like a continuous path of travel, but it's also a distinguishable color, so you can still train children. You know, you still need to check for vehicles. That's what it's doing. It's asking them to check, but the drivers have to give way.
So does color yellow signify anything else, or is it just because of its visibility and prominence?
It's used as a warning color. It's signified in the MUTCD. So it doesn't, it's used typically as a warning color. So it doesn't have an actual, you must do this, but it raises an awareness. So it's chosen because it's kind of consistent with the message of warning. It's also, we need a color that contrasts really well to the ramps to make the pathway look apparent. It also needs to look like the pathway is continuous to make that obviousness. And also a color that's just, describable. To me, that's the final piece of the puzzle, so that we can pass the story on if anybody is confused and say, hey, where it's yellow, you need to check.
So we have got a question here. So Simon asks, does yellow signify shared path?
No, it doesn't signify shared path. No.
Thanks, Brett.
So the next one is state of awareness. So I think with some of the other principles, we've kind of got the hang of those, but we don't talk about this predictability and the state of awareness that much in our road design. So this is the previous site that I just showed you before it was treated. So basically, and it's just about 50 meters away from a school. So if we imagine this path user about to cross the road here, they need to think about this vehicle turning to the left that might be turning left. They need to think about this other vehicle, and they need to think about this third vehicle. So their brain and their mind needs to think about 3 different traffic streams at once. I've got an example of this now. This is my son, and so we'll just so we've practiced this crossing lots of times. We've talked about the 3 different streams of traffic he has to think about. It's pretty tricky for him to see around that parked car, but he's waited till the crossing supervisors come out. Now, oops. Now the camera work. The camera work in that video is not great. And that's because what actually happened is he checked the first stream of traffic, this first blue arrow. He then checked the second stream of traffic. Sorry, I don't know why that's going again. But he forgot the third one, which is an easy one. So it's this second one that we often forget. You know, it's difficult to get. And that's when I've kind of stepped out and made myself obvious and things. So it's those 3 different directions of traffic. And I like this quote from Mark McDonald, a technician I work with at TMR. There's a reason we don't let children drive motor cars, and making them make these complex decisions and think about lots of different traffic streams is not the right way to be designing for a state of awareness. So it's really about these cognitive limitations, and also putting responsibility on the older and licensed road user. Those people have demonstrated a certain level of competence. And so this is an example of the treated crossings after they've been installed to address those issues. We'll talk about the parents' concerns about these locations before they were treated as well a little bit later. But I also just wanted to show you as well, when we talk about cognitive limitations, it also goes for drivers. And so the way that we've designed these crossings is they're set back a vehicle length generally from the roads, so a vehicle can safely store, and then they check the path. So we're separating the 2 tasks in terms of a driver. If you think of a driver exiting the road, first of all, they stop to give way to the path users, and then it's a separate cognitive task to think about the vehicles on the road. If that makes sense. So it's not overloading people with lots of different things to think about. Session 3, we'll hear from our world expert in mind wandering during everyday driving. So we'll hear more about that, kind of how raised crossings can be useful in that situation. Oh my God. Right, so we're still going with state of awareness. This is a pretty big one, and I like to think of this as my most complicated slide. So hang in there with this one. But some really interesting studies that have been done on what's called visual looming and how we perceive vehicles coming when they're traveling at higher speeds. So I'm going to talk you through this graph. If you've got any questions, let me know. But basically, the distance, what they did was they took children out to a road, and they basically asked them to tell them when they thought there was a safe, and they had a car coming along the road, tell them, sorry, I'll just take a step back. So they took children out to a site, and they timed how long it took them to cross the road. And then they stood next to them, and as a car approached, they asked them, would they be comfortable to cross? And they had to keep saying yes until the car was close enough that they decided no, they wouldn't cross because it was too risky. They didn't have enough space. And what was really interesting was that as the vehicle speeds got higher, so they went from below 50 kilometers an hour up to over 60 kilometers an hour, the buffer time between how long it actually took them to cross and how much time they allowed shrunk. So below 50 kilometers an hour, this is the safe time is here. They had about a 3-second buffer, which I think is a pretty good safety buffer. If it's going to take you 5 seconds to cross, and you're probably going to be killed, having an extra 3 seconds up your sleeve is probably pretty good. But when you got over 60 kilometers an hour, it was down to less than 1 second. So even though the risk had got higher, their buffer had got less. What they found was that people that in this study, we determined that children 5 to 12 years old could not reliably detect a vehicle approaching at speeds higher than approximately 40 kilometres an hour. So in the exact scenario where we need them to be able to make a safe decision, often they actually aren't capable of making that safe decision. And if we think of this example here, we're 100% relying on the inexperienced road user in this example. This is a route to school, for them to make the safe decision about, is there enough time for me to cross the road before there's a gap? So we really need to think of this as part of the state of awareness. It's the cognitive kind of limitations of the users we're providing for and what we need to think about on the path network. We also need to be thinking about someone with a vision impairment or a mobility impairment that's going to take them longer as well. I found that really interesting, that one. So forgivingness, the final of these 5 criteria is forgivingness. And this is, if all else goes wrong, what we need to make sure of in a safe system is that we don't kill or seriously injure someone. And we've got good data around this. We've got data, it's about the crash forces, about at what speed somebody gets hit. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with this diagram, but basically these are the crash curves. I'll just walk you through it. So down here, if a vehicle hits a walker at 20 kilometres an hour, there's a 10% chance of death or serious impact, of death or serious injury. So this is what we call our critical impact speed. So 20 kilometres an hour for death or serious injury, or 30 kilometres an hour to prevent a death. So what we want to make sure is that if a person is hit by a vehicle, it happens at below this critical impact speed, and 30 kilometres an hour is generally accepted as our safe system critical impact speed for a pedestrian being hit. What happens if they get hit over 30 kilometres an hour is we start going straight up this curve until we get up to about 90% chances of death or serious injury at 50 kilometres an hour. So it's an enormous difference in what we can do with a raised platform. We can be expected to take 20 kilometres an hour off the speed, and that can be the difference between 90% chance of serious death or serious injury or 10% chance, which is really what we're aiming for. Now, the other interesting thing, I like this graph because it's got all the other types of crashes on it as well. One of the common concerns we have about installing raised crossings is a perception that we'll have rear-end crashes in that kind of situation. So for the same kind of crash, for a rear-end crash, the critical impact speed is 55 kilometres an hour. So if we reduce our speed limits to below 50 kilometres an hour, we're unlikely to cause a rear-end crash that is going to kill or seriously injure somebody. Also, if we use these treatments and reduce, if we think about those intersections and the exchange function, if we use these treatments to lower vehicle speeds at these conflict points, we can address a whole lot of other types of other crashes as well. So adjacent direction crashes, which is kind of a T-bone crash, they're the most serious, the next highest risk injury as well. So we can be using crossings to create low speed sections of the network to protect people from those types of crashes as well. So it's pretty dense, the safe system principles, but there's functionality, homogeneity, predictability, state of awareness, and forgivingness. Now, it's about getting to the stage where you're comfortable with the tools you've got to make good decisions about the treatments that you're recommending. I find these a really nice, rigorous kind of process to go through, and often it's the predictability and the state of awareness where things get quite weak, and they're good things to just pick up all the different elements of a design or what's going wrong in a situation. So session 4 will also go into more detail about things like the ramp gradients in terms of how we create this forgiving environment, and how we address some of these issues as well with the design things. So we've got an activity here, and this is where we're going to have one of the polls. And what we're going to do is we're going to be applying these principles in a bit of a checklist kind of form. So what I want you to do is we are going to watch this video. It's only about 30 seconds or so. And then I want you to fill in the poll. It'll come up on your screens and say whether you agree, neutral, or disagree with each of these statements. So these reflect the sustainable safety principles we've just been through, and this is how I kind of apply them in my brain. So, you know, the first one in terms of functionality. So the intersection provides a clear through or access function for all users. So it's clear whether it's really protecting that through function or the exchange function. And so go through each of those ones. So we'll just play it now. This kid's getting bored. He's lost his attention's gone.
Poor kids there.
That one's checked with mum.
Beautiful.
Okay. So,
Shall I launch the poll?
yes, that would be great.
Beautiful.
This is Fez's first time launching the poll.
Magic is happening now. So are people addressing number 1 or all of them?
All of them. They should be able to do all of them at the moment.
Beautiful. So team, the poll is launched and it should be said module 2 poll 1, and you can actually go through the question. Fantastic, with people starting doing this. Cool.
Okay. Oh, it's
People are
moving.
getting the handle. Fantastic.
Nice work, Fez. First poll launched.
I love it. These courses are educational for myself for a variety of reasons. Not only the material that you, for example, you, Bridget, and Ken have taught me things that I didn't know in this course, and I'm not paying. It's so good. Okay, so we've got 16 people out of 35.
Well, I like these speeds are similar.
Beautiful. Awesome. 26 people. Good. Fantastic. We're close to hit 30.
Okay. I think we can now. I'm not going to end the poll because I just have to close the poll. I think, do you end the poll, Fez?
I do. So 85% have completed. I think we have a consensus. I'm happy for ending the poll, and so you can all see the results. Let's do that.
Yep. Let's
You have 88, 90%. Okay, let's go.
Okay. So it provides clear through or access function for all users. So what do we get? We've got 97% disagreeing. Nearly everybody's disagreeing. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not really sure what it's doing. It's kind of a through function, but it's obviously an access and exchange function as well. Speeds are similar to where users might interact. Definitely not. They're coming through at fairly high speeds there. It's easy to predict the path of users. Of other users. I think roundabouts can be really interesting for this. If they're not really slowed down and the speed's controlled, it's really difficult to predict which vehicles are actually exiting the roundabouts. Inexperienced users are not relied upon. Well, we're 100% relying on inexperienced users in this situation. There's facilities for people with disabilities in the neighbourhood as well, so that needs to be considered. And crashes, if everything goes wrong, crashes are probably going to cause serious injuries or death, most probably for vulnerable road users, people walking and riding. They're the most vulnerable in this situation. So it's a bit of a failure in terms of our 5 criteria, but that shows how it works. And we've got one more example now. So we're going to go into, well, is this poll 2? Nope, we haven't polled that. Hang on. Right. So we are now going to go, we've got another example here. Again, it's a roundabout. So we'll do the same thing. Interestingly, this has similar traffic volumes as the other roundabout.
I'm also interested how my brain uses comparison to sort of judge the situation. So in a sense, it's sort of a bias. I'm biased by your first video to judge your second video.
Yes. Right. Well, we might launch the poll on that one now too.
Let's do that. So let's see how we go here. Cool.
Oh, we're going much better.
I also have a question for us to ponder here, and that's the difference between perception and actual risk.
Perception and actual risk, yes. Perceived and actual.
So, Bill has a comment here about sometimes visual clutter, like grasses, greenery, furniture, road furniture, street furniture, they might block children or younger kids who are not as high. Yes, I think that's the case.
Yeah. Yeah, vegetation actually needs to be very low to maintain sight lines, because you can't just see some of the kids, you need to be able to see most of them to be able to see that they're moving, at least half of them. Okay, do we want to close that poll now? I think we've got
83%, and we've got really good consensus.
Yeah.
I share the results.
It's funny, I just see it. So anyway, what we've got here is, yeah, we've got more consensus, but we've kind of turned the results upside down, where basically you know, we've got most people thinking that this does provide that exchange function there. Most people, not everybody, you know, we all have different perceptions of these things. Speeds are similar where users might interact. Well, they're not exactly similar, but they're a lot more similar to the example in the last example that we saw. They're possibly getting down to around that 30 kilometers an hour and or below in this situation. And so that's what we're aiming for. And we have definitely, one of the things with the homogeneity is that at lower speeds, we want to get them at higher speeds, they need to be very similar. At lower speeds, we have a little bit more leeway there. So we're probably getting to those critical impact speeds because it's a very powerful combination of roundabout and the race crossings. It's easy to predict the path of other users, so it's reasonably easy to predict. We know where they're going to be crossing. There's pretty good compliance in this environment because the crossings are, they've been designed to guide people to those crossing points. Pretty good. Inexperienced users are not relied upon to judge complex environments. So we've got most people kind of agreeing with that, certainly a lot more than compared to the last one. So it's not a perfect world, but it's pretty good. In terms of actual and perceived crashes, both these roundabouts, I don't think have had any pedestrian crashes recorded on them, probably for different reasons. Probably because, you know, most people would avoid the other roundabout in terms of the actual exposure, the number of users at these these roundabouts, there's users all day, every day using these roundabouts, and it's working relatively well. At the other roundabout, people are doing whatever they can to try and avoid it and only crossing if they have to, kind of. So it's quite interesting when we come to that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a good question. Okay, so I just want to the next section, we've talked about risk, and that's quite a complicated, that's our big chunk of kind of theory in this part of it, the session. And the next part, we're going to talk about connection. We're not going to go into this in a whole lot of detail, but we're going to use the Miro board in a few minutes. So if you can get your link going to that, that would be good. So when we're talking about connections, it's like where are crossings needed in a safe system? We've gone through risk. Now we're going to talk about connection. I'm just going well here. So looking about our network, looking about where people want to go, design lines, movement in place, where they need to access public transport. So where is connection needed? Now, can anyone recognize this site? You let us know in the chat if anyone recognizes. This is a Strava heat map. So I've flipped it to just show people walking, which is probably more likely people running or a lot of exercise. That's what people usually use the app for. Has anyone got any ideas where this is? No hints, no clues? I think this harder example, this is actually Bly. So you had a look around Bly in your homework. So I've just chosen that as our example. Just because you'd had a bit of a look around, I just like using these maps because it shows that when people are walking or running, they're going nearly everywhere, you know, in terms of where is connection needed. You know, we need intersections, we need mid-blocks, we need connections to attractors, between attractors, side roads, all sorts of places. If we have a look kind of in, you know, we were looking at our network and things, and we think about, hey, where might we need to treat these situations in terms of where's connection needed, and need to think about where there's risk. So we also need to think about the fact that pedestrians really don't want to go out of their way. You know, they're very committed to design lines. Pedestrian trips are short trips. They don't go very far. So getting people to go a long way out of their way because we've decided we're going to put 3 crossings in this whole vicinity is not really going to serve our purposes. And I've just got that example because, yes, there is a crossing just down the street and there's another one down the street, but they're not serving the purpose of these children that have a design line straight across the street there. So we're not going to go into much detail, but where is connection needed? Well, in lots of places, and drawing attention to providing connectivity between bus stops. You know, these can be the super highways for people who don't have licenses. And if they can't get across the road to access the bus stop, then that limits their access to public transport. So thinking about that, thinking about side roads, thinking about roundabouts has all of those places have been identified in our own site visits, as well as by community members as well. So we are going to do a quick activity, and this is in the Miro board now. So if we go to the Miro board.
I just shared the link in the chat room here.
Fantastic. And we are going to go into this growing network now. Bring everyone to me. So in case anybody's lost.
Beautiful. We have 22 people here. No more, 24 people. Well done.
So this is the task. You're managing an application for a subdivision east of the town centre. The site is expected, so this is our new development out here. The site is expected to double the traffic volumes on the road connecting to the town. So this is the town centre over here on the left. Where might you install pedestrian crossings? So use a sticky note to show locations where you might consider installing a raised crossing. Include your initials on the sticky note and a comment explaining why you'd think about putting one there. Detailed as often. So what have we got? So we've gone straight to providing a crossing across the side road, which is great because that connects the means this existing path network is maintained into the township like that. I like that we've picked up that this roundabout. I've put this example in because we often do a good job of thinking about how the new developments and increasing traffic volumes will impact the performance of intersections from a capacity perspective, and that might trigger some improvements to active transport. But I don't often see it triggering improvements to crossings. When we get to a certain volume on the road, the refuge crossings become too risky. There's not enough gaps in the traffic, and we need to provide additional support for those people crossing. So I like that what we're thinking about is with this busier road, we're going to have to upgrade our path networks to make sure that we continue to provide, you know, an accessible path network for everyone, and thought about those increasing volumes on the roundabouts, put them in there. The side roads, we've thought about the other side road. I like this where we're thinking about crossing the road as well. That's a really good option. If people can't cross the road and there's an attractor down here, we'll be needing to do that as well. So not just about town centres, it's all those different attractors and schools and things like that as well. Entry and exit to the township, direct link to town services. What else have we got here? Well, I like, oh gosh, they're getting good with the emojis. I didn't know we had these ones. What do you think, Fez? Do you teach them that?
Oh, I told you, like in the first session, first Miro exercise, people were just like there. Second one, bang. That's so good. Well done, people. It's, again, very fascinating for me to see how our brain works and learn things. Wow.
Well, I hope this stays with me. When I was putting my introducing myself, and I just couldn't go past the little walking duck, and I feel like that little walking duck can happily walk down the street into this township now, and they will be well provided for. Okay, I think we will go back to our session. Let me get this back here. Right. Okay. So summary of where in Greenfield. So in terms of where in Greenfield, we've talked about risk and we've talked about connection. So we've got the 5 sustainable safety principles. They're also on that cheat sheet. We've been applying those to a couple of different sites. There's also other methods that you can use as well. Like I like these as a first cheat sheet in terms of what's going on at a particular location, what's the weak point of the facility. But if you need if you need to argue for a facility, there's other tools and methods you might be wanting to look at to quantify those risks. So things like the safe system assessment can be a really good way of comparing between different treatment options. And the other thing we did was we looked at connection in terms of where it's potentially needed. Okay, we are halfway through now. So we are going to take, let me see, I think we can maybe have 7 minutes, I think. So we'll come back at 5 past to be generous.
That's beautiful. And thank you, Prue. So everyone, please stretch your leg, have a quick walk, have a coffee. 7 minutes. We're going to continue this. See you soon, Prue.
Okay.
By the way, thank you, Kathy, in the background for stopping and starting the recording. You're a great help. Thank you, mate.
I'm noticing there's questions about the colors of the crossing and things. Yes, I should. Yep, I can talk about that. And Ken will talk about that too.
Yeah. I think when we're providing this summary of the course like to the next presenters, like this can be going to that one as well.
Okay.
So, Prue.
Okay, we are back. I couldn't see the chat before. Okay, I'll just quickly answer that question about yes, there is a difference in terms of the regulation and it will change state by state. But generally the shared path crossings, which is like the one you're seeing in front of you now, that allows a bike rider to continue without stopping or walking their bikes. In some states, they'd have to walk their bike on a zebra crossing. Or in Queensland, they have to stop first. So this is something that allows a bike rider to legally cross. And that's why the design has kind of come from more a road design kind of background with the give way signs and lines. Now we are going to get into a brownfield site. So things get a little bit complicated in brownfield sites. We're no longer talking about a theoretical network and a theoretical problem that we're trying to solve. We've got kind of actual people, actual lives. We've got legacy networks that have already been designed. And so what I like to think about in brownfield sites is we're trying to look at where a crossing is most needed and where we can get them in often as well. So when we're talking about brownfield sites, we have this other element of feasibility. It becomes a lot stronger in terms of our decision making. We need to address the risk. We need it to be in places where we need connection, and we need it to be feasible. And we need it to be where it's most needed, because retrofitting in brownfield sites is not going to be cheap. As cheap as in greenfield, where you can design it in. So feasibility. Oh, and we have our flying pig introduced to our session as well. The first thing, I'm very proud of this transition, aren't I, Hafez? We go from our flying pig to regulatory control systems and Australian standards. So we have our regulatory control systems about a pedestrian path and a shared path. So in terms of assigning priority, there's one of two different methods that we can use. So the pedestrian crossing line marking, so that's in Australian Standard 1742.10, which deals with pedestrians, or there's the shared path line marking, which is in 1742.9, which deals with cyclists. And that has, so we've got the zebra crossing and the pedestrian leg symbols, and we've got the piano keys and the give way signs are the two different regulatory control systems that we can do. And these are the rules. So we're going to talk about some of the rules in the Australian Standard, Australian and New Zealand. I believe these apply in New Zealand as well. I think I'm getting that right. It's usually Australian New Zealand Standard. I need to check that, but if anybody has some information there. So the rules, what we have in these situations is no more than one lane of moving traffic in any one direction. Now, in session 4, we'll talk about some ways that has been some workarounds in that kind of environment. So that generally means that on anything greater than a 2-lane road, we can't install one of these raised crossings. Speed limits on approach need to be no greater than 50 kilometres an hour. So generally that rules out 60 kilometre an hour roads. It specifies not on arterial and 85th percentile speeds on slip lanes. So slip lanes, you can put them in a variety of higher speeds, but you just need to have that speed at the crossing point as low, which usually you can achieve with the raised crossing. So these are the rules. So this impacts our feasibility. Just sharing some examples of what some jurisdictions have been doing. So each jurisdiction, what most jurisdictions do is they publish supplements to the Australian Standard that apply in their states. So in Queensland, they published Queensland guidance that allows provides specific conditions around installing crossings on slip lanes and on roundabouts. So the guidance around slip lanes now applies to roundabouts as well. So there's no restriction on the speed limit in terms of the roundabout, but the 85th percentile speed at the crossing should not be 60 kilometres an hour. So that means in this situation, you can install a raised crossing. So these are two very powerful safe system treatments. So it means that you can install them. Often what we look at is if we really need a crossing in an environment which isn't a low enough speed environment, you can introduce a roundabout with crossings, and then that can address a variety of risks. So even up to 70 kilometres an hour in Queensland. So in the Queensland supplements to Queensland Guide to Traffic Management and the supplement to the Australian Standard, they have specifications around how these things can be installed and examples. But basically, when we're installing them to a roundabout, it's very similar to a side road where we're putting it one car length back so that the driver thinks about the roundabout, and after that they can think about the path users. And there's a maximum of path users coming from 2 directions. So we're not even getting that 3 that we do at an average side road crossing with a child. So that's how that guidance is applied. And they've got specific guidance in their supplements, the Guide to Traffic Management and the Guide to Road Design as well. Session 4 will go into more detail about the placement of crossings at roundabouts as well. So how do we apply the rules? So, road safety platforms we've talked about before, they're efficient, they're safe, they're value for money, they're transformational safe system treatments. So we don't want to be limited by necessarily the road conditions we've got. We might be wanting to challenge our existing road conditions to create environments where we can install raised crossings. So modify road environments where you can to install crossings and install other treatments where necessary. So 60 kilometres an hour roads, changing to a 50 kilometre an hour road, that means you can get a raised crossing in, and suddenly we've gone from people crossing in a 60 kilometre an hour environment where fatal injuries are almost certain if something goes wrong, to being something like 30 kilometres an hour because we use the raised platform to take it down from what it's from the 50 that it's posted at. So you can go from, completely not safe system aligned to completely safe system aligned with a small reduction in the speed limit. So that's one example there. In multi-lane roads, that's a situation where currently we need to signalise those intersections, so put your budgets there. And then things like introducing roundabouts to change the road environment. You can have lots of benefits in terms of drivers as well, and road safety benefits along the corridor because we're creating those safe access points and exchange functions. So that's the way we kind of want to encourage approaching this problem. But knowing the rules is an important place to start in terms of where we can install them and feasibility. Also, the Queensland Department of Transport Main Roads produced a guideline for raised priority crossings. It addresses some of the other issues about feasibility. Some of the things that we've identified in this course and in previous courses, barriers for these kind of treatments, is practitioner knowledge and practitioner comfort with these new types of facilities. So in the Queensland Raised Priority Crossing Guideline, it's actually published as some research where they took observational studies of the crossings that had been installed to map the interactions between people riding and between cars. And so they've published that data, the findings of that data, that helps give you confidence in how these facilities are actually working. And this is just an extract from that guideline because it's some of the data that was collected around an uncontrolled crossing. So this one didn't have a raised priority crossing, and it was one of the more unsafe environments that they measured and undertook observational data on. So that guideline is a good guideline for looking at how you can deal with some of the kind of constraints around drainage, also cost and constructability, but also having some of that research about how these are actually functioning. And that was, for me personally, that was really useful in terms of gaining confidence in how these facilities can work in a variety of settings. There's a question.
Yes, so we have a question and a comment.
Yes.
So the question is from Johan, and Johan says, why use a pedestrian path rather than a shared path? Zebra versus yellow top.
So the shared path is where you have where you're providing for bike riders as well. So if it's a principal cycle network or an important cycle route, or we're expecting riders to be using that path network, then we'll be using the shared path. I think it's a little bit in environments where you're not likely to have many bike riders or not expecting bike riders on the paths, then using the zebra. In Queensland, bike riders can use the paths unless signed otherwise. So we need to be providing for them and thinking about them on most paths. So we use.
And I paraphrase what Craig Thompson has said here. Even though we need to sort of provide signalization as 60K in 60K environments, we can also provide raised platforms in conjunction with that. And also, Prue, a question from myself. You mentioned something that really talks to me, and you implied it. Maybe we can be more explicit. You said, don't let the guides and guidelines and rules work against you. Actually use them in your sort of favor. Do you want to explore a bit on that, or expand on that a bit for us?
Yeah, I think we use a typical approach to use the guidance to say what we can't do, rather than to describe what we need to do. Like we've embedded this course in Safe System Principles because it sets the vision and it drives what we're trying to achieve, which is how we need to apply our guidelines to get there. So our guidance tells us what's possible. So we know where we're going. So we just have to chart our path, but so we need to know what's in those guidelines so we can pick and choose how we can get to what our vision is. So it's I think, and we are in a great time now because the guidance is becoming stronger in setting that vision, and is enforcing our need to protect people, and in doing so, I think we're also going to have really good opportunities to connect communities as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I would add duty of care. As public servants, practitioners, we have duty of care. So guidelines shouldn't stop us to fulfill that duty of care.
Exercise, exactly. Yeah. Complying with the guideline doesn't necessarily guarantee a safe outcome, and not complying with a guideline doesn't necessarily mean it's unsafe. That's why we need to be applying to it's our vision, but also our duty of care, isn't it? That's good. There's a question here about 60 kilometres an hour speed zone, traffic signals required. Can we also provide a raised platform in conjunction with the signals? Yes, we can. Yep, and that will improve the alignment of those signals with Safe System Principles in terms of reducing those speeds. There, we can do it for raised signalised intersections as well. A great option for signalised.
I love it. I read that comment as a comment, and you read it as a question. Fantastic.
Oh, there's no question mark, is there?
Good on you.
Okay. let's go. How am I going time-wise? I think we're going, session 4 goes into more detail. There we go. This is our bossy wombat. He's popping up everywhere. Okay, methodologies for where in brownfield. So this is where we get complicated again in our second half of our presentation. As I said before, there's kind of a lot of guidance about where you can't put crossings in, but you know, we don't have a lot of guidance about you must have a crossing here. So what we have here is we've got 3 different fairly simple methodologies for where. Now I've chosen these methodologies because they're simple, which means they're repeatable. We can scale them up, we can scale them down, we can put them into a story to tell our communities or our decision makings what we're doing. I think some of the barriers that we identified in our survey, and one of the things we want to get out of this course is, you know, being able to develop a program of works and do it at a bigger scale or a smaller scale. So that's what we'll talk about here. So the first one, and I'm starting with very basic. So I'm kind of starting to think, you know, these ones with little organizations and what can you do with, you know, not a lot of resources and things. So crossing upgrades is an easy place to start. Having a look at your existing crossings, mapping whether these are places of concern for communities, whether they are consistent with safe system principles in terms of those 5 principles we talked about from risk. We can go out and look at our existing crossing sites. I'm just going to map these kind of things against our different criteria in terms of risk, connection, and feasibility. So if we're looking at crossing upgrades, we can say, yep, they're pretty good at risk, because we know that we can evaluate whether a crossing is upgraded. We've come to the site and we can have a look at that. Connection, we know there's a need for connection, often because they've been put in place as a result of previous planning or requests or something like that. So they're actually quite good at finding those, you know, desire lines already. And they can be really easy places to put crossings in, because we already have sight lines. We've got lighting that we can upgrade instead of having to bring whole new infrastructure in. So it can be cheaper and easier to really kind of just upgrade our crossing network by converting them to, you know, this safe system treatment. Roundabouts is also a really good example of that. As I said before, these are really compatible treatments. We already have that speed control from the roundabout. Roundabouts also can be severance points in networks. We had that example from the walkthrough of those roundabouts that looked really challenging to cross. Again and again, when I've surveyed communities, we come up with roundabouts being a challenge. And it's that predictability thing that's really quite weak in terms of which vehicles are actually going to leave the roundabout, do I need to give way for? And often you can't predict that safe gap. So it's also, when you come to roundabouts, we've often got 4-way intersections. So we're not just treating one route, where often it's an intersection of multiple walking routes or cycling routes. And it can make it a lot safer for cyclists as well. So that can be really good for risk and connection and feasibility as well. Great environments. Places with established demand. So this can also be, you know, at its most basic level, just based on practitioner site observations. You know, these are obvious examples here where we've got demand, but it can also be more structured and it can be a systematic approach. So it can be looking at all the schools in your area, treating the first 300 metres, you know, in relation to your schools to make sure that we've got safe crossing facilities for the main routes to schools. Again and again, when I've surveyed schools, these side road crossings have come up as an area of concern. It was really interesting because before we had this data, it was very difficult to convince other practitioners that it was worth investing in these crossings. But my argument was that, well, if they don't feel safe for the first 20 metres of their walk, how are they going to walk a kilometre or 2? So the further we can get all that congestion and away from the school, the safer we can grow. We can make it for people walking and cycling. So looking at those areas with established demand, that can be around town centres, but I'd encourage you not to overlook schools or places with retirement villages, and connecting to local shops and thinking about neighbourhoods as well. Established demand, another interesting area is looking at public transport. So whenever you see bus stops, and often these are on some of those grey roads that we talked about before, where they're really trying to do too many things. They're kind of a through function, but they're also providing that access function, and they're not doing either of them well. And in terms of, you know, someone with a vision impairment being able to access both of these bus stops, I just can't imagine how it's possible. And someone who can't see can't drive a car. So this is such an essential piece of infrastructure for that person. So one of the things we can do is we can look at bus stops. Certainly when we did a community survey in this area, there was lots of quite emotive comments about concerns about children's safety trying to get to these bus stops as well, and just how concerned people were about children crossing this road. So we have children and we have elderly people who are very much dependent often on these facilities. And if you can't connect between them, then the bus is pretty useless, really. What's good about the public transport stuff is we can actually get established demand from the public transport patronage data. So you can have a look at, how many people are actually using it, focusing on areas with the most vulnerable users or with the most users. And you could also potentially get before and after data, because we can continue to have that data afterwards. So to me, it seems like a nice, obvious point, as well as really connecting people to the outer world, out of their communities. So a really good opportunity there. Does risk, it's a great job of connection. Feasibility can be challenging. The third example I want to talk through, which leads into our Blythe case study, is community-led planning. This one's all about, we're still looking at where there's risk and where there's connection, but we're kind of trying to bring it in, and we're tapping into this community knowledge about where are the severance points in a neighbourhood? Like, who are the experts at knowing where the severance points are? They're the people who are walking around the neighbourhood or want to walk around the neighbourhood and can't get across certain roads and things. These are experts in where does it feel unsafe. It also can potentially mean where is there latent demand. If we ask people where they need better crossings, that's where they want crossings. And it shows that as well. Helps us to identify the priorities. And when we're doing community-led planning, we want to be tapping into existing communication channels in the community, not trying to create our all new communication channels, but looking, hey, what's there already? Can we tap into these existing communication channels and get them working so that we can bring their local expertise into a data set and use it for good planning to get what the community wants? So, and what's really good about that is that it kind of talks, it brings that risk and connection together. They do that. These are the people who are out there going, we really need connection here, but it feels really horrible here. So you'll find when you get this kind of data that the worst spots are really obvious, and you can pass that on to decision makers in your story. So we're going to go through this community-led planning process, and it's kind of four stages to this. The first one is about finding barriers in the network. Then it's about defining and prioritizing those barriers, scoping or planning, and designing and building. So we're mainly going to be talking about kind of the first one and the next couple as well, where we apply some of the principles we're talking about. What you'll notice down here is as this process goes through, we go from parent or carer or community input. This is an example that's been used at schools, through to engineering input. So at the start of the process, we're really responding to that expertise from the community and getting around their neighbourhoods and their towns. And in the tail end of the process, we're applying our engineering input to test what's going on, understand what the risks are using our safe system principles, and then scoping and planning solutions, hopefully designing and building. So community-led planning, just similar to what you have been doing for your homework task. When we do community-led planning, we go out to the community and we ask them really straightforward and very specific questions about their area of expertise. So where are safer crossings needed? So we've done this a number of times now, and the community actually comes up with really sensible responses. So this is an example from the Sunshine Coast, and these are a couple of the sites that the community identified. So if you look at this side road here, similar to the practitioners in our group and the responses that I received from practitioners when you went on your walks, it was side road crossings were identified. It was interesting, this zebra crossing was identified, but specific comments were made about putting some speed cushions in or raising it. So I think it shows really good alignment with those safe system principles, that they appreciated the crossing, but they wanted the vehicle speed slower at that point. The existing refuge popped up as a place that people were really concerned about as well. And again in the surveys that I've conducted, refuges have come up as a place of concern. I'll show you some data about that as well. Again, so if we look at the other places that appeared where a safer crossing is needed, we've got this roundabout here. So that unpredictable environment. Again, we've got refuge crossings here. So in the median. Now, so this survey was actually undertaken around a school. We had about 90 responses to this survey, and we've probably got, what have we got, about 10 different sites to treat. It's not like we've got, each person was allowed to provide up to 10 spots on the map, just like in your homework task, but we didn't get hundreds of different spots where people were concerned about their safety. We got probably a dozen, and it's really interesting how it does focus in on specific sites, and turns itself into a data set, in my experience anyway. So in this as well, we asked really specific questions about how people feel about different types of crossings. So how concerned are you about your child using this type of crossing? We showed them pictures, and that's what we do. We've done it with signalised intersections as well. The results were really, when I first got results, it's really compelling. And the first survey was just a practitioner survey. They're doing some research on this at the moment, but it was kind of overwhelming in terms of how concerned people were about specific types of crossing. So if we just go through this, this graph, so the red area is the response to the question, it's very concerned about a certain type of crossing. So an untreated crossing, not really any surprises there, 85% of people very concerned. Untreated sign code, we had 60% very concerned, but the remaining was somewhat concerned. So nobody was not concerned with their children using untreated side roads. If we look at a refuge at Roundabout, we only had 5% of people not concerned. And a refuge crossing, 10% of people not concerned. So if we think about getting children to school and being able to facilitate safe routes to school and things, how are we ever going to achieve it if we're putting refuge crossings in terms of our routes to school? If we've got 90% of parents very concerned or somewhat concerned about this, it's not going to achieve any kind of mode shift. Raised zebra, it turned it completely around. We've got 80% of people not concerned. So these are the kind of treatments that we need to be considering. So we've done some more studies since this, and similar results for the raised zebra crossing and the signalised pedestrian crossing in terms of being the strongest, but consistently refuge crossings and side road crossings being problematic. If we look at our safe system alignment too, I think the parents are doing a pretty good job of judging in terms of how well aligned these are with safe system principles. So, you know, raised zebra crossing, very well aligned. We've got the other crossings are kind of moderately, you know, they improve some factors, but they're not going to be transforming any network. So interesting. This data becomes really important because when it comes to people walking and cycling, they're the most vulnerable road users. We're not necessarily going to have crash data because people aren't necessarily going to turn up if the environments are that unsafe. And unfortunately, in our networks, we have so many environments that are that unsafe that people just aren't really going to go there. Have you done this research for concerns about raised crossings without pedestrian priority? I haven't done that research. That's interesting. And I don't have any examples, but I have heard multiple concerns about those kind of crossings. So without serving people, you know, certainly in Australia anyway, where they're not very common, where they do turn up, there's concerns. And usually I hear about them when people are concerned about them. And I recommend that, you know, the priority is established. So yeah, but I think in different contexts that might be different. So it would be interesting if they're a common treatment. They're not a common treatment here. And so when I hear about them, it's usually concerns. I think Gemma doesn't like them either. Okay. So that's our summary of methodologies for brownfield sites. It's not, you know, a specific do this, don't do this. You know, it would be lovely if we had some data that says, okay, once you get to 7,000 vehicles per day, or once you get to, I'm not sure, much lower than that, you need a raised crossing because people can't get across this road. We don't have that kind of specific guidance. We have more guidance around where you can't put crossings in. And that's why we need really strong methodologies around where we can, where we should be considering raised crossings. So I presented these three things here. the community-led planning, the established demand, the crossing upgrade. So one of the things is to have a kind of transparent but story that can be retold in terms of building that business case for why you need to invest in crossings. But one of the things with the community-led planning that has been really strong is you can actually go to decision makers and say, this is what our community wants. And when one of the plans I did where we actually was talking to the school principal, and I had showed him the heat maps, and he was like, great, you know, we've got these. The next time the councillor says, is there any infrastructure you need? We'll bring out our plan and we'll say this. So it doesn't even need to be led by the governments in some situations. If the community can be empowered to get this information together, then they can be guiding investment in their networks where it's most needed. Raised hand.
So Prue, we've got a couple of questions and comments, so maybe we can have a pause and answer them. So we have from Johan, are there warrants required for a yellow top crossing and zebra crossing? In other words, minimum number of pedestrians or cyclists specified by the state road authority, such as Vic roads?
I can't talk for Vic roads. Let me think. In Queensland, there certainly are not. We moved away from the warrants. We apply safe system principles to describe where crossings are needed now. There's the Austroads pedestrian crossing tool, which is referred to. I find it not particularly useful for determining where crossings are needed, and it's a bit restrictive in terms of side roads. So that's why really in terms of methodologies, they're up for development.
And also, Tom here mentioned a good comment, no warrants required. In Victoria, DUI sign on local road is not a major traffic control device. Yep. So Bill says here, have you done this research for concerns about raised crossings without pedestrian priority? And I'm sorry, I don't remember which research Bill is talking about.
Oh no, I think that's about the practitioner research, but I think I addressed that one. We haven't done it, but yeah, I just said that normally I hear about those things when they're problematic.
Beautiful. Also, Gemma mentions about courtesy crossings being a bit confusing and not really working in Christchurch. We totally agree with that. And Tom mentions a comment, in Melbourne, raised threshold crossings are very common. Shopping centres at side streets. I totally agree. I live in South Yarra. They're everywhere and I love them.
Everywhere,
and also, Simon here shared some processes from New Zealand. Thank you, Simon. Great. Thank you. For
yeah. That's interesting. And I think the, I've used, the raised crossings in Melbourne. They're so much better than an untreated crossing. And I think we have all different degrees of intersections too. If you think back to that example that one of our participants shared from Brisbane, with the enormous slip lanes at that side road, it's a very different environment to having, nice tight radius turns and a raised threshold treatment and things. So, the raised crossings in Melbourne, I've seen those, work really well. And in something like what we saw in Brisbane before, where there's, huge slip lanes, you need to really change the intersection and make it a really strong treatment as well. So how are we going? Okay, so action time. Okay, so we have, this one is just, we're going to use the chat to answer this. So the spots on this map show A, an unusually precise storm forecast, B, future planning for electric helicopter air taxi landing pads, C, places where safe system principles, parental concerns, children and vehicles most likely collide. No helicopter landing pads. Apparently we are going to have helicopter landing pads soon. We've got a helicopter.
Everybody is saying A. I see 90% A's.
Yeah, the storm forecast would be a whole lot bigger, honestly. We'd like. Okay, I quite like that. It's safe system principles, parental concerns, children and vehicles most likely collide. That's what I think they show. Okay, what else have we got here? True or false? 8 out of 10 parents said they were not concerned when their kids use this type of crossing. What are we going? True, true, true. Yep, we've gone with that. That's exactly right. And it seems to be fairly common standard. I think, I don't know, it just seems to me that parents have a fairly good understanding of safe system principles. Okay, I've got another crossing here. Likelihood and consequences of crashes at this intersection are higher because A, vehicle speeds are greater than 50 kilometres an hour. Crossing is frequently used by children. The crossing is frequently used by elderly people. There are no other crossings within 1 kilometre in each direction. All of the above. Yeah. Yeah. I like your point, Johan, about not sure about the kids and the elderly. I know the kids, I've definitely seen the kids. I think I just made up the elderly, but I am aware that there are elderly people that do want to use this crossing, but aren't comfortable to use it. So that's something to be taken into consideration in terms of accessibility. Okay. Now, stretch. Okay, right. This is just saying stretch, stretch, stretch. Okay, now we're going to go into our blind light case study. I'm quite excited. This is a new case study to last time. Last time we did Swan Hill, but I didn't have any existing data to compare it to. So this time, for those of you who haven't done the homework, in the homework, you were asked very similar questions to what parents were actually asked in this neighbourhood. So we're actually going to see how the practitioners went compared to the parents. So now I know how to survey parents and practitioners. So anyway, this is some of your results. So we asked you, where might race crossings be needed in blah, blah. We didn't actually ask that, sorry. We asked where are safer crossings needed in blah, blah, or better crossings. So these are your results. So if you were the practitioner doing this thing, this is what you'd be seeing. So you were allowed to put up to 10 spots on the map, and we had about 25 people had responded when I downloaded the data. So it's good. We've got some strong themes here. We've got along School Road. It's kind of scattered a bit along School Road. We've got some crossings, I think mid-block crossings. We've got some people have picked up the side road crossings there. We've got a few people who have picked up the signalised intersection here. I think that's really interesting too. You might have gone into Street View and yeah, it'd be interesting to hear why people thought that was an area where safer crossings were needed. There is only crossings on, let me see, 3 legs of that intersection. And I would concur with what you've said there. I don't feel like it feels safe. And yeah, so if we go over onto our heat maps, we've kind of got people identifying all the sites kind of through the middle of the town, down along here. I think it's a pretty good depiction of where crossings are required. It demonstrates that the major road through the town is an issue. I put the water tower up there. That's a little bit of a hint in terms of this being an extremely steep, high road, and so not the most friendly walking and cycling route. But now, in this one, I've actually got the parent responses compared to the practitioner responses. So on the left here, these are the responses of the parents. And on the right here, we've got the practitioner responses. Has anyone got any observations on what they think about that?
I need to control myself, not commenting.
They're not commenting.
Yeah, so
centered around the school. Yep, we've got lots on the school. Yep, lots on the side roads at the school. And I think with the practitioners, there's more results in the practitioners, if you know what I mean. It's not as centered around a few key sites. So the parents are more centered around some very specific sites. So if you look at Bellevue, that was really important. This side road here, Wagani was really important as well. Whereas when we got the practitioners, it wasn't quite as decisive. It wasn't, in terms of this is what we're going to do. So it's interesting because there's certainly similarities here between the two data sets, but we've got more precise data from the school. So,
Prue, we have an interesting comment from Tom here, and Tom says, results are more dispersed beyond walking distance of a school for practitioners, and that shows bias in parents. Speaking of biases.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is very much, it's about, and I'm glad you mentioned that. This is about the school and access to school. So it's not as much about general access, but what has been really interesting is that many of the issues identified by the school and by the parents are also issues for the community as well. So I've been in touch with the residents. After I did this survey, the residents group actually came and asked me to talk and have a chat because they're so concerned about similar issues. Main concerns are getting across this main road in the middle of Bli and not knowing what they can do about it. So having a compelling data set that we can go to people and say, this is an issue, you know, these crossings are not safe. And before we had this data set, it was very difficult to convince people that these crossings weren't safe. They meet sight distance requirements. And it's interesting, our assumptions around sight distance requirements, because I don't think they allow for somebody traveling with children and with pushing bikes, and that you actually need more time to communicate to a child in a noisy environment. There's likely to be errors and all sorts of things going on. So this is a really good step for you know, the first step of making that case. But it's not going to necessarily include everyone. But it is interesting in that it might be able to pick up on a lot of the problems in the town. And it was very easy to conduct, you know, really easy. You know, with a few emails, we had 110 people. So 1 in 4 families responded to this survey because they were so concerned about the accessibility issues in this town. So yeah, so it's definitely not going to get everything in everyone, but they are picking up on access to bus stops. So lots of people have told me there's no attractors on the other side of Thomas Road up here, but there's bus stops, and people have picked up on that as well, which is, yeah, a concern for people in the town. So it's just a start.
That's awesome. Okay. It shows how passionate you are about involving your community, because that question brought so much insight out of you. It shows the passion you have for including your community.
I'm very passionate about this town. I feel like they should get to know. Anyway, so that we go next. So where might crossings be needed in Bli? So think about sites you identified. How many of them might you consider making safer with a raised crossing? So this was interesting. We had a few people thinking about all of them. Most people were saying most of them. So these are fairly, you know, the road through town, that's classified as a subarterial road, but I'd call it one of those grey roads where it's trying to do a little bit of everything. So certainly not ruling out raised crossing in that situation. And then we had a few people talking about half of them and some of them. So I found that pretty interesting. And it's interesting to gauge from other practitioners, you know, where are we calibrating in terms of where are raised crossings? We don't have definitive guidance about this, so having these kind of conversations is interesting. What are some of the possible reasons that better crossings haven't been provided at these sites? Feel free to enter some things in the chats as well. You know, all of these sites that we've identified have not been built, or they might have been built and they're not up to standard. Why is that? You know, it's an interesting problem. And I think as we had that case study before, we've got more and more development going on to the north. And as development happens to the north, this road gets busier. But for some reason, the pedestrian network hasn't been keeping up. So we've got, what have we got here? So one of the main ones was better processes are needed to identify where communities need crossings. So I guess that's one of the things we've been trying to do in this session, is say, we need better processes, we need tools, we need methodologies, we need to share what works, what doesn't work, and have a go at it. Crash data doesn't pick up all the barriers in walking and cycling networks. It's people are making judgments about their own safety in terms of not turning up to environments that are really unsafe. These are the first users who are going to be seriously injured in any kind of crash. So we can't rely on crash data alone. It's not easy to justify investment in crossings on technical grounds alone. So we need a compelling argument to justify these treatments. Especially if there's not crashes. That's not, you know, that's often the compelling argument, which is often missing. So this is an attempt to solve that compelling argument and say, hey, our community wants this. There's a lack of clear guidance about where crossings are required on networks, so we're not keeping up as the roads are getting busier with the requirement to upgrade our crossing facilities. And safer crossings are not a priority for the community. Well, we didn't have many people agreeing with that one. It was more towards the disagreeing, but the other ones were all considered as a barrier. Do you have any pedestrian and cyclist counts where been installed? Could be multiple raised crossings on network or just a sim would be good. Yeah, this is an interesting area, Todd. There is a pedestrian crossing tool. No, I will, there's a tool that TMR, Transport and Main Roads Queensland, has developed that has got counts that are available from around the state, which is for pedestrian demand forecasting, which does collate some of the data to forecast the improvements of a crossing. Like there's not, the data is not great, but that's the best tool I know of for forecasting the improvements. So that's a tool that I can provide a link to in the resources afterwards. Now, what else have we got? Okay, what are some of the possible reasons that better crossings haven't been provided at these sites? Sorry, this is about what we can do in future. Sorry, what can we do? So conduct more direct engagement with communities to understand their needs and priorities. So most people seem to, that was either agreed or strongly agreed with that. Develop technical guidance about where crossings are needed. The Queensland examples of roundabouts, I think, is a fantastic way forward in terms of doing that. It's taking one example where it's incredibly difficult for people to cross, and it's saying new roundabouts in Queensland will include raised crossings. And I think then the roundabout treatment does truly become a safe system treatment for all users. It's an amazing treatment there. So we are getting better guidance around these facilities and the use of their facilities. And as we get better with our speed limit design guidance as well, there might be future opportunities that open up. Developing processes with the community and develop effective ways to identify barriers and communicate to decision makers. One of the things I love about the heat maps is that anyone can decipher them very quickly. And that's really important in terms of if we want to change behaviours and attitudes, we need a story that we can repeat and that can be passed along the line to get through. So that's where a picture can be very compelling. So that's the going through the community-led planning, and hopefully you had a bit of an experience of what it's like to receive the data and having a look at the community data versus also the practitioner data and what it's like to feed that information in as a community member. When we have spoken to community members about this, like the school in this situation, were really people have been really delighted to get these kind of surveys. I think there's a lot of kind of emotion around, being able to move safely around your neighbourhood and being able to convey and pass that information on. So we have had good feedback when we've provided surveys that people feel quite satisfied doing it. We've also surveyed secondary college students, but in that situation, we bribe them with pizza parties. So it's a very different kind of audience there. Now, just a couple of little things before we finish. So we've just got a couple of kind of closing exercises. So which of the sustainable safety principles is this facility struggling with? So we're just going to use the chat again here. So we've got, them all now: functionality, predictability, homogeneity, state of awareness, and forgivingness. So C, homogeneity. Oh, it's a little bit of homogeneity. Apparently it's 10. The 10 kilometres an hour. This is another one where shared zone vehicles must give way to pedestrians. Give way. See, you can see the signs, they kind of multiply when when it's not all working. So I've got a bit of C. Yeah, it's not homogeneous speeds. It's signed at 10 and it's probably operating at about 30 would be my guess in this situation. B would be one of the ones that's the main issue that I think is difficult in terms of predictability. It's not easy to predict where somebody's going. D, state of awareness. Yeah, shared zones I actually find with whilst we install tactile ground surface indicators to communicate with people with vision impairments, I find with children, they don't respond to the tactile ground surface indicators. And if the pavement treatment's all the same colour, they just see it as all their stomping ground. So it's, I think in terms of that state of awareness, it's not doing a great job. It's probably a little bit of everything, to tell the truth. Originally, I thought it was B, but I think you're right. I think we've got a little bit, you know, the road function is too high to have a shared zone. In this situation, you need a stronger treatment, a more compelling treatment if you're going to have those kind of volumes in assigned priority, in my opinion. Okay, can raised crossings be installed on bus routes? Yes. I kind of gave it away with this one, didn't I? They can be. So Ken will talk about the ramp gradients and how we specifically do that. I wouldn't just say they can be. I think they need to be. You know, we need to get people across the road at bus stops, and yeah, we need to be opening up these routes. Okay, this crossing is on a 60-kilometre-an-hour road. It connects to schools, bus stops, and residents. I think this one is actually a pole. Okay, you're right. You onto this, Hafez? So what we're going to do is use the poll to say how you feel about the following treatments to treat this problem. So I'm just going to play the video here. It's better with noise. We need noise.
Beautiful, almost 30%.
This is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, the balance. One observation, like there is a difference between participants who answered more quickly compared to those with more deliberation. Fascinating.
It's changing, is it, with further consideration?
Yes.
I like it. Maybe it's a bit leading if you read all the questions. This is interesting.
There's so much psychology goes into
polls
and questionnaires, and sorry, Vesna. Vesna says she's lost the survey. Sorry for that. So we have around 70% and 2 minutes. Shall we sort of end the poll?
Yeah, so let's close it. Yeah.
Cool. 80% already. Good. Let's go. Share the results.
Yeah. Can everyone see the shared results? Can they see? Oh, I have to do this.
Oh, yes, people. Yes. Good.
Is that what they look like? I felt like they looked. Anyway, normally they look different to that, don't you think?
Yes, Zoom is not my sort of, playing field.
Okay. Signalized pedestrian crossing. This is this is really interesting, I think. So, we've got a maybe and an if I have to there. So yeah, not as many saying preferred, though we've got some signalized intersections with crossing. We've got a bit more saying preferred, maybe if I had to. That's I'm finding it hard to raise signalized intersection with crossings. Maybe we've got a lot of maybes, I'm thinking. About the same as preferred, and if I had to reduce posted speed, we've got that as preferred, and install raised crossings along the corridor like that, maybe, and if I have to, roundabout with raised crossings. I think that we're in a good place with this. I think all of these options should be considered. I think if I was if for me, I would probably say signalized crossing. I'd probably say if I had to, because it saves, in terms of it's going to be more expensive, and I'd like the money to go further. But all of those options, I think, need to be on the table and need to be considered. And it's good that we're not eliminating any of them at this point in time, I think. So I think there's, we've got some ambiguity around that, and I think we should be very comfortable with that.
Fantastic.
Okay, now summary. So where to install raised crossings? I'm just going to do a very quick reflection. We've got a couple of minutes, not long at all. I think I've kind of been consolidating as we go. So, we talked about what and why and what the three kind of key criteria of a crossing are. Where we are now, we went on our walks and looked at our existing ideas about raised crossings. Greenfield sites, talking about the need for connection, but also those principles to understand where we've got risk in our networks and where we might need to be able to treat them. If we master those principles, then we can start spotting the risky spots pretty easily. We went through our 5 sustainable safety principles with very long names, and then we had the 3 methodologies in terms of crossing upgrades, established demand, and community-led planning. Rules about where, the importance of knowing the rules, but remembering our vision and what we're trying to achieve, applying them to that purpose. Our Bly case study, and then our practitioner case study, where we were looking at kind of similar data there. So I think we have 2 minutes left, but other than that, I think we are almost done.
Yeah, and I would like Pro to thank you very much for teaching us a few really critical things, talking about those principles of sustainable safety, giving us really practical advice how to locate crossings, also giving us really good sort of exploration of risk, connectivity, and feasibility in brownfield and greenfield, and also stimulating our brains with exercises and comparing them with your practice. So I personally am very thankful to you. I know how much you have put effort to ensure that the course is happening and doing the work in the last couple of days. So I just want to thank you, and also thanks Kathy here in the background helping us. But more importantly, thank you all for spending the time, being enthused, asking questions, sharing comments, sharing your experience, and being with us. So having said that, I want to thank you all and come to the 3rd day, module 3. Oh my God, Bridget gonna blow you off your shoes.
Everyone
Am I
loves
right?
Bridget.
Oh God. Oh yes. Awesome. So have a lovely day, people. See you soon, and thank you very much for it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bly. Said bly.
Thank
I
you.
love it. Thank you, Mike. Kia ora. Awesome. So I stop recording and close this.